everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my top 5 nonfiction books of 2017. I recently did my top fiction books of the year, and I'll have that link down below and up here in the little card so you guys can see. I picked 5 books, and honestly it was really hard. I really could do a top probably 10 of the year, but I decided to narrow it down so that I could really kind of showcase each book. So the first book that I want to share with you guys is one that I don't have with me. I read this as a library copy, and that was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi. And this is a book that I read in February for Reid So Lit and Black History Month, and it was a book that had a lot of hype, but I think it was really well deserved. This is a book that's part essay, part memoir, part letter, but it all comes together to kind of be structured like if it's a letter to his young son, and it's very clear that he's dedicating this book to his son. In this letter to his young son, Coates is basically explaining and describing what life is like as a black man in present day America and all of the events in history that has led us up to this point. It's very moving, it's raw, it is very powerful. And I remember when I first talked about this book on my channel, I described how I felt like I had been punched in the gut, and that's really what this book did. It really made me feel like I was being punched with reality for a black man in America. You know, it really puts you in the shoes of someone like Coates, like his son, and like countless other people in America today that happen to be black. And it's a very sobering read, and it really puts you in those shoes and makes you realize, you know, what kind of America we're living in today. I think it should be required reading because it's just so perfect for this time. So if you haven't picked this up, I definitely recommend that you do. It's worth all of the hype that it gets. It's very short, but like I said, it's just a very moving, powerful read. The next one I want to talk about is another hyped book, but one that really blew me away. I was so excited when I finished this book, and I felt like, you know, everybody was right. You know, it's one of those things where a hyped book actually lived up to my expectations, and that doesn't usually happen. And I'm talking about Unbroken by Hillenbrand. I don't think I can even fit it in the frame. It's a really huge book. There's a movie adaptation of this book, and that's kind of how I originally heard about it. I had seen some people talk about it on BookTube, but you know, not a lot of people talk about nonfiction, but it still kind of was on my radar. I just avoided it because I didn't want it to be another hyped book that, you know, didn't live up to the hype. And so it's always so disappointing when you read a book and it just isn't what it was for everybody else. And that's happened to me so many times here on BookTube, where I've just picked up a book that everybody raves about and it's just not for me. But this was not that type of experience. I absolutely love this book, and I highly recommend it. This is a story of a young man named Louis Zamperini in the Second World War. He was drafted, and he was in the Air Force, and he was a lieutenant bombardier. And one day he and his other team members, their plane crashes in the Pacific Ocean, and he miraculously survives with 2 other men. And then what lays ahead for him is just thousands of miles of ocean, a fight for survival, sharks, enemy aircraft, starvation, thirst. He goes through all of that, and then he is captured and sent to a POW camp where he, you know, suffers even more horrific things. But really what this story is about, it's not really like a story where you feel like you're reading all of this horrible stuff for no reason. I think it's a story that talks a lot about how resilient we really can be as humans, how hope and faith and all of those things can really determine how far we make it. And that's what this story is really about. It's a story of survival, it's a story of the human spirit, and it was just amazing from start to finish. I actually listened to the audiobook of this, and I felt like it was completely elevated for me. However, I do like that I have a physical copy because there's a lot of pictures in here, and since there's a lot of characters that are being talked about, I really like being able to reference back to the book. And because it's one of my favorite nonfiction books ever, I'm really glad that I have a copy on my shelves. The next one I want to talk about is a book that I, again, don't have with me. I got this one out of the library, but I will be getting my own copy very soon, and that's The Rise and Fall of Alexandria by Justin Pollard and Howard Reid. This was a book that I had seen at the library before. I put it on a list and I completely forgot about it. But recently I decided to just go back to the library and just read those books that I've just had on my list for a really long time. And this was one of them because I had heard about the Library of Alexandria, but I didn't know that much about it. And this is one of the few books that I found in my library that talked about it. So I'm really glad that I picked it up because I loved it. I gave this book 5 stars. This is essentially the story of the founding of Alexandria by Alexander the Great, how the library came to be, and all the different discoveries that happened because of that library and because of the type of city that Alexandria was. The discoveries that were made were things like the earth was not flat, geometry, the Bible was converted, or the Old Testament was converted into Greek, and a lot more. That's because this was kind of the hub for people that were into science, literature, math. Any kind of inventor would go to Alexandria, and that's where they would write their ideas down and put it in this library. And sadly, the library was burned and we lost a lot of the information that was there, but some of it did survive, and thankfully we know a little bit about what was in the library and how it had become such a hub for all these geniuses. So that's essentially what the story is about. It's about everybody that played a role in building the city and also tearing it down. And so I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very readable. It's definitely a history book though. There's a lot of facts. There's a lot of different scientists and inventors that are being talked about. There's also a lot of politics that are being discussed. So if you're into any of that, then I highly recommend this book. I have another book by Justin Pollard that I really want to get to, and I hope to get to that one next year because I just really love this book, and I highly recommend that you check this one out. The next one I want to talk about is Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. I actually picked this up because of my offline book club. One of the women there recommended this book. She said that she really loved David Grann's last book. I think it's called The Lost City of Z. And she really enjoyed that book, so when she heard that he was publishing another one, she wanted us to try it out, and I'm so glad that she recommended it because this was an amazing, just devastating book. This is about the Osage tribe that was settled in Oklahoma, and they were sitting on lots of oil, and so when the oil was discovered, they became very rich. They would own mansions, they would have servants, they would drive some of the first automobiles, etc. And then in the 1920s, something was happening where they started to kill a lot of these Osage tribe members. It got to the point where I think 24 of them were murdered by various means, and then Hoover was the head of the FBI. He had the FBI the FBI was in its early days, and so he had them try to discover what was going on, and they failed miserably. So Hoover enlisted the help of a Texas Ranger named Tom White, and so Tom White kind of made his own little task force to figure out what happened, and then they were able to uncover the mystery and find the perpetrator of all of these crimes. But it's not as simple as that, because it seems to be one of those crimes where so many people are involved, so many people played a role, and you know, a lot of people got away with it, and that is a very hard thing to read about. It's hard to see how many lives were affected and how these people were just killed because they were rich, how they were taken advantage of while they were alive, and all the injustice that seemed to be rampant in these parts back in the 1920s is just not an easy read. I felt like I wanted to throw this book at the wall because I was so frustrated so many times, but I think it's an important story to tell. I think sadly there's a lot of parallels to the 1920s and now when it comes to other people and how we interact as a society. It was just an amazing read. I highly recommend that you pick up the book because there's a lot of pictures, there's a lot of characters, and a lot of different things that are happening, and so you could easily kind of miss a lot of the story. And also seeing the pictures of some of the victims really bring them to life and make you see them as people, you know. And so I highly recommend this book if you are okay with reading about some terrible things happening. But I think it's an important part of history, and so it should at least, you know, people should be made aware of how these tribe members were treated. It really makes me want to read a lot more books about Native Americans and their struggle. There's so much history there that I'm very ignorant about, and this book kind of made me want to read a lot more. And the last book that I want to share with you guys is The Six Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert. This is essentially a book about the Six Extinction. There have been 5 mass extinctions in the past, and we are currently in the Sixth Extinction. And this book kind of describes what that means, what a mass extinction is, and it describes the different species that are currently gone or are in their way to becoming extinct. And then finally, it really talks about how humans have impacted the planet and how we are pretty much the catalyst for the Sixth Extinction. And it kind of shows how we have altered life on Earth. So it's very fascinating. It's definitely a book that's for people that enjoy reading about science or listening to science podcasts or something like that. There's a lot of scientific terms being discussed and different species being talked about, but there's plenty of illustrations and anecdotes that the author includes to really make it more readable. And it's also short enough so that you're not feeling like you're being overwhelmed with a lot of facts. So I highly recommend this if you're curious about extinctions, if you're interested in evolution, if you're curious to try like a nonfiction science-y book, then this one would be a good pick for you. I really enjoyed it. I found it to be fascinating, and this is a topic that I don't really hear a lot of people discussing, so I was really curious to get my hands on it. So those are the top 5 nonfiction books of 2017. Like I said, I have a ton more that I could talk about, but I really wanted to narrow it down to 5 kind of as a challenge to myself, and so that I could really focus on each book individually. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any really great nonfiction books that you think I should check out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.